Hey, welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD User Monthly Training webinar for November 2019. This is Eric Bobrow speaking to you from a beautiful day here in San Rafael, California. A little bit cool, but really beautiful with the fall leaves. I hope you're doing well wherever you are around the world. Let me know that you can hear me and that you can see my screen with a little outline of what we're going to be talking about and looking at today. You can fill in the questions or using the GoToWebinar chat panel. Tell me where you're calling in from. It's always interesting to see that. If you are a member of my coaching program or my training programs, then you can use the Slack conversation workspace and tell me that you're online. All right, so I see Rosemary, Rick Matthews from Aussie down there, not burnt out yet. Good, good. And Rick, all right. Tom from Vancouver, Glenn from Auckland, okay, Monroe, Bob in North Carolina, Dayton, Ohio, Indiana, Melbourne, Vancouver, Alberta, okay, Seattle, all right, Van, Liana, Tekla, Hemant, Paul, okay, excellent, and AD, Zlatko, good. We are going, we've got 86 people on, I'm sure we'll get a few more during the session. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, ArchiCAD 23 came out in about 2 months ago, maybe just under late September. And of course, I've been exploring it and enjoying, for the most part, the new features, as well as I think in some ways the speed definitely has been improved for certain types of operations. So that's been very cool. Now, one of the things that most of you, well, let's say many of you know, is that I've developed a template for ArchiCAD back in 2007 for ArchiCAD 11 with an architect who partnered with me on that project named Scott Bulmer. And together we created a master template as a startup kit for ArchiCAD users. And I've kept it updated and kept enhancing it and refining it over the years through 11, 12, 13, 14, all the way up to now 23. And I'm pleased and proud to announce that the 23 version is ready today. And I will be shipping it to anyone who has purchased it. But that's not the focus of today's webinar, although it was the inspiration because I've been working so hard on it. One of the things that I include in Master Template is a sample project. It's interesting to see Graphisoft is now starting to share some sample projects. And I haven't had a chance to look at the one that they just posted a couple of days ago, but that's great because sample projects allow you to study a well put together project and reverse engineer it, sort of see what they've done, how the settings work. You can say, I love this, or maybe you don't like the graphic style or something, but it's always something worth studying to see if you can take the best parts of it and incorporate it into your work. Now, in the sample project for Master Template, over the years, I've put in a whole lot of different ways of using ArchiCAD, ways of viewing your project. In last year, I put in a really big effort to try to incorporate it into the sample project, lots of different teaching scenarios, so I can easily pull up views and show how things work. And of course, if you have Master Template, you can pull them up and see how they work. Now with 23, I didn't make a whole lot of changes, but I did refine quite a few things. There's a lot of sort of careful study of things to make sure that they were working. And I realized, there's so much here, even though I showed Master Template last year in a major webinar, that there were a bunch of things that just really, I think, were worthy of just sharing because you can use them in your own projects, whether you have Master Template or not. So here are 10 cool ArchiCAD tricks that you can use in your projects. And I'm going to go through them in the context of the Master Template sample project, but you're going to be able to see by the end of this session how you can incorporate them regardless of what template you're using. So the first one is one called legends. So if you think about a legend in a, any type of a presentation or a drawing set, it's typically a set of elements or graphic symbols with some text or explanatory information next to them so that you can say, oh, that's this type of wall, that's that type of wall. This is this type of an electric receptacle or this type of lamp, etc. So a legend is something that you can see to understand the graphics of the presentation. But if you place the elements on screen in your ArchiCAD environment using the same tool as you use to draw those elements in the first place, so they're not just 2D graphics, they are walls or objects, then of course you can use the eyedropper. So let's take a look at a bunch of different ways that you can use legends to speed up your access to frequently used parts, like library parts that you use, wall assemblies, roofs, all sorts of things, and the settings, of course, because when you eyedrop, then you can instantly have the settings. All right, so we're gonna go in through here. So this project, if I go here, I've demonstrated it, over the years, and so if you've seen anything before from me, you've probably seen this project. So here we have the first floor plan. It is a two-story little building. Let me just get a view, an overall view of it. There was a cutaway. I'm going to show you some of those things there. So here's this little view. It's not super complex and it's certainly not big, but it does have, some subtleties and finesse in terms of all the different ways that things fit together. Now, if I go back to the plan here, and you should all know that you can use the eyedropper either by clicking on this icon or using the shortcut key, the Option or the Alt key. And you say, I want to do another interior wall. Hover over an interior wall like this, and then you can go and, particularly if we have this set for just a single wall or a chain of walls, we can draw another wall and another wall. Now this is going to go into the window, probably not a good idea, but basically we picked up those settings. So that's the eyedropper. Now I'll undo that. Of course, I can eyedrop a door, and I can put in, a door, and I'm not sure where I would put in a door here. Let's just eyedrop a window here, and perhaps we put in a window underneath the stairwell or something like that. So the eyedropper is fantastic for doing that. Now, once you've got a project going, you can eyedrop anything that you've already placed. But when you're starting a project, it can help to have a whole set of parts off to the side that are already preset based on your preferences, maybe from a previous project. So how might you do that? Well, it could be very simple. You could take any project here, and I'll just eyedrop this wall here, and I'll put in a little piece of that wall. I'll eyedrop an exterior wall like this. I'll put in another, wall. This is going to be, an exterior one. I'll say pick up, this refrigerator here, or this refrigerator here. Here's a component. We'll pick up a sink. I'll pop that in. Maybe drop it in there. Pick up whatever it is. Pick up a dimension line. So you can pick up all of these things. Now, if you imagine that you've taken the time to go through your project and you pick out the 10, 20, 30, or 100 items that you think will be likely to be used useful in another project, you could literally go and select all of these in this project, copy them, go paste them into a new project, and then eyedrop them. So that becomes, it's not really a legend, but you can imagine that you just have a bunch of these and they're labeled carefully. So that's one way to do this, is to have them, collect them in a real project, put them off to the side, get them nicely organized, and then paste them into another project. You can also go and say, save as, and there is an option for saving the module file from the clipboard. So we could cut this, using the standard keyboard shortcut or edit menu, and anything that you put on the clipboard, you can save it as a module file, and then you can drag it into another file. So it literally is just a collection of elements that you've copied or cut onto the clipboard there. Now, the logical extension of this is that if you really put in the effort, you can end up with something as extensive as we have in master template. So for example, if I go to my section for legends and I double click on this, you can see a very large amount of elements, all carefully organized. So I can zoom in on these and see, sort of groups. So here are some interior walls, ceiling slabs, exterior walls, and even variations like these are exterior walls that are, if I zoom in on it, these are non-insulated, these are insulated versions of the walls. And you can have labels. You can see this is like a legend here in that it's referring to it. When I hover over this, this label is referring to that element. You can see as I hover over it how it highlights that element just slightly. And this label here is actually pulling the name from or the type of wall from there. Now you can set up shortcuts to be able to go to different views. So let me go to a different view of this. If I go to the legends that I was just looking at, we can look at them all in a group. I can also save views, let's say, of objects. So this is one part, and you saw all those different sections, stairs and railings, etc. So these are saved views. How do you save a view? Well, whenever you are zoomed in on something or you're looking at something, you click on Save Current View, and you can have it use the zoom so that when you double click on it, it jumps to it. So that's one way of using legends. And you can now literally say, hey, I need this type of a railing. And if we zoom in on these things, then we'll see all different types of railings that we can look at. And you can even save these legends in 3D views. So these are saved views here. So for example, if I go to something like the public restrooms here, this is going to be a view of some elements that you can eyedrop, literally use the eyedrop to pick up settings for public restrooms or an office. So these are views from the legend, and I can say, oh, I want to eyedrop this type of element here and put that into the project. So you can be jumping back and forth to these areas with these saved views. All right, now another way that you can use legends, and there's just so many different ways that you can do this, is in 2D views. So for example, if I go to this one, this is a worksheet for sections. So in a section view, if you have a section view, you could eyedrop this group of human figures and drop it in to set a scale. You can eyedrop some things for insulation. You can even eyedrop labels so that you can just literally go place the label and it'll remember that text that you had. So just by eyedropping these things. So these are for sections. We can have this in elevations. And by the way, these are living in what are called worksheets, which you should know about if you've been using ArchiCAD for any period of time. They are 2D work areas where you can place line work, text, etc., but also objects. And those objects then you can select. So what is this object here? This is a car symbol. So we can either copy this or we can eyedrop it and then place it into an elevation just to provide some scale and context. Now it turns out that you can actually use this even more broadly by going to something like this. This is the kitchen and bath cabinets. Now you'll see here, these kitchen cabinets, here is an elevation view, and this is the plan view. So if I eyedrop this, we're going to see that I have a cabinet that is 3D. Now this is in a worksheet, so in this worksheet it is 2D, and it's not considered part of the building, and it won't be reported in schedules. It's just 2D graphics, but I can eyedrop the object here and go place it. So you can then just have common sets of elements like cabinets and just eyedrop them, as long as they're objects. You can't put walls and 3D elements like roofs and doors and windows into a worksheet, but you can put put these objects here. So these obviously carefully arranged, and you can eyedrop them directly from the worksheet. We can have this worksheet open and switch back to, let's say, the plan view. Maybe we're want to be in an interior view here. So this is, an interior view. So I've turned off dimensions and certain markers and things like that. So I can then click, and you can see how it's placed that cabinet into position. Of course, I can go back and forth to the cabinet here and pick, another one. Eyedrop this, and then go back to the plan and place that in. Let's see, place it here. I guess I have the object settings set to rotate on the fly. Let me just put it back to just the normal orientation, and then if I click here, it'll just in a single click place that. Now we can also go and tell ArchiCAD that we'd like to show this as a trace reference. I don't think I'll demonstrate that right now, but we can actually just have that off to the side and then eyedrop it from the side. So those are some of the ways that you can use legends, and I'll give you one more bonus one, and that is that if I go into the worksheet for, let's say, some typical notes and labels. All right, so these are notes and labels that have been collected. Put the notes and labels here. Okay, I'm not seeing that there. Oh, maybe it's, let me go into my view map, because these worksheets, maybe the layer combination is needs to be changed. Here we'll go into the worksheets and go to the, actually let's go to the structural notes here. So this is a worksheet with some things that we can eyedrop. Obviously I can eyedrop some text. I can eyedrop a symbol like this, and I can copy and paste them. So these are notes that you can collect up in coherent groups. Obviously for structural, you have a bunch of things that when you're focused on notating for that purpose, or whether you're doing electrical or any other type of focus. So there's lots of ways you can use legends, and I guess one other one would be set up in our detail drawings here. Actually, no, it's in the worksheets, and it would be in the detailing library parts. So while I do recommend in general that you work with 3D models and take them as far as you can, these are 2D parts, and if we eyedrop a part here like this, this allows me to literally just place these into any detail. So you can have all of these parts that are in the standard library, but very quick way to just select them. All right, so that takes us back to through legends. Now we're going to go to schematic and sketch style. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've had people ask me questions like, when you're in the early stages of work, and let's just put this back to, just a construction document plan. If you have this set up, and maybe we'll do it for the interior view, like this. So this is a different layer combination. It's turning off the dimensions and turning off some of the markers with the model view options. So when you do this, if you have a lot of detail, like the wall composition here, or of course when we are first drawing, and if we did have this set up with showing all of the insulation, the client may think, oh, looks like you're pretty much done. Those look like architectural drawings that are well delineated. But you may be in the early stages, and you may already know it's going to be this type of wall assembly or that type of wall assembly, but you want to communicate something different. So how would we do that? Well, one way is to change our model view options. So model view options are available from this little button here, or from the document menu, model view here, model view options. And in the model view options, you'll see that we can choose to say, do we want to show door and window markers, Or do we want to have something that's more for presentation, where we're turning off the markers? Or do we want to even have something like a site plan, where we're, or a schematic plan? There are different options here. Site plan, actually, we can choose to not even show the window symbols, just only the doors. So these are ways of choosing what you're going to see. And if I just say, let me choose site plan here, we're going to see how all of a sudden the windows and doors look totally different. But the walls still look quite detailed. So we can go into what are called the graphic override combinations. So graphic overrides were introduced in ArchiCAD 20, and they have been developed a little bit further over the last few years. They do allow you to say, hey, in construction documents, I want to turn off the zones because I'll only show the zones sometimes, but perhaps in something like a presentation view, I want all the cut fills, like for the walls, to be black. Let's just say okay, and you can see what that does. So very quickly, we can just change the way that we look at things. Now, one of the great time savers in ArchiCAD is to save views with settings that you want to reuse. So for example, here I've got sketch and schematic views, and let's go to a schematic view of this first floor plan. All right, so this is, instead of being black, it's just two parallel lines. I am seeing, some details of windows, some of doors, but no markers. And if you think about, if you were to show this to a client, let's get rid of these extra little pieces that I just created. This does not look like a drawing that's gone very far. Now, this type of schematic view can be done in elevations as well. So if I take, let's just look at a full elevation. We'll go to, let's say, an east elevation here. And you'll see in this elevation, we've got some nice delineation of the surfaces with hatch patterns. We even have some shadows, etc. Let's go now to a similar view that's been saved for the schematic east elevation here. And you can see it's now much simpler. So even though you might already have an idea of what type of door it is, or whether the window is going to have separators and mullions and things, you may just want to say, well, here's the massing. Let's just focus on that. So how is that done? That's done using the a particular choice in the model view options, which you can set up. So you can basically create new ones anytime you want. It'll make a copy of what you've got, and you can change the settings of how the elements are viewed. And then you can also, of course, use the graphic overrides. And this one is set to turn off shadows and shading, as well as turn off the cover fills, which are going to be the vectorial line work showing, stone or roof shingles, etc. Each one of these, you can say, look at the rule on it, and it's basically no shadows. It's saying, if it's a 3D element, give it just airspace, just a fill. In other words, don't put any shading on that. The cover fills, like similar, we say edit those rules, and if it's not a zone, so if it's a 3D element but not a zone, fill type missing, interesting. So this one really should be just one of these empty ones, either empty or background fill, should be like that. So that's what this one does. It basically overwrites the fact that we would normally have the shingles showing. Now we can go even further if we go back to the floor plan with the schematic, and we can make it look sketchy. So if we go into sketch plans, here's another view, very similar, but we've done two things. I've turned on the furniture. That's just a layer combination. So the layer combinations here are available here, and you can see that we're looking at a condoc furniture plan, so a furniture plan specifically for output, and that of course turns on the floor furniture layer, which is not visible in the construction documents. But also, in addition to changing the layer, you can see how this has got a wavery line. Now the wavery line is done with the model view, with the graphic override options here. And you can see sketchy lines. So this is one, if we go to the edit the rules, it says any type of line that it doesn't have a dashed line to it will replace that line in this current view, or when that graphic override combination is active, we'll override it with this particular sketch line, which is built into all versions of ArchiCAD. It's just one of the standard symbolic lines that is wavery. In Master Template, we actually have a sketch 2 and a sketch 3 as options. The sketch 3, if you look closely, is more wavery. Sketch 2 is less wavery. So we could switch that style to make it a little bit less extreme or more extreme by using a different option there. In fact, you can see here's sketchy lines 1 and here's sketchy lines 2, and the only difference is this. So if I manually change this right now, we'll see now it hardly looks sketchy, but it does have just a slight difference there. Now if I double click on this, it'll restore the earlier view where it has a certain, a slightly more prominent view. Now I probably wouldn't zoom in on it that way, but if you took a screen capture of this, it just has a certain tentativeness. And of course you can do that in the elevations as well. So if I take that east elevation, what are we going to have here? Just a little subtle waveriness. And so you take that as a screenshot and it just has a little different feeling there. So that is, let's see, we'll go to here. We've now gone through schematic and sketch styles. We've talked about graphic overrides for different views, different ways of showing line types, removing fills, filling them with black or white, etc. But let's look at a couple of more for the sections and elevations. So for example, here, by the way, let me know what you think. Are you following what I'm doing? Do you think these would be useful for you? Are they new at all? Love to get your feedback as I'm going, because I'm going, miles a minute there. So please fill in either Slack or in the GoToWebinar chat area what you think. I'll take a sip too. All right, well, we have over 100 people in here, and I'm waiting to see somebody type in something. So Mark is saying, going great. Thank you, Eric. Good. And Tekla says, the sketchy plan is new for me. Okay, good. Well, please keep giving me some feedback. It helps me know whether I'm clear and helping you with things that are useful. So let's look more quickly at graphic overrides for sections and elevations here. And by the way, I'm going to be sharing a resource pack that'll help you to install these types of views into your ArchiCAD project. If you go to archicadtutorials.com, and I'll show you that site here. So this is my ArchiCAD tutorials website, which has a bunch of different video tutorials. You'll see free ArchiCAD resource pack. If you're not already opted in for my email list, if you're watching this, recording, for example, you can go to archicadtutorials.com and click here to get the free ArchiCAD resource pack. I had one for version 22. I'll be updating it for 23 in the next few days, and you'll definitely get that if you sign up through this form. All right, so that's archicadtutorials.com right there. All right, let's look at graphic overrides for sections and elevations. So when we are looking at the construction document version of an elevation, we are looking here with line work and some shadows and vectorial hatching. But actually, this, if we say, show me the settings for the elevation marker on the plan, and this would be true in this case for all of the markers, the model display options include to fill the surfaces with color. So the elevation actually has color, but it's been turned off. let me show you how that works. Remember this graphic override? This is set for elevations, no shading. Let's go to no overrides. Basically, it'll just take it raw and say, okay. And you can see here is something more like a rendered elevation. So if I go into the graphic overrides here, you'll see that there are several that say condoc elevations, no shading or shadow, and plane. So let me go to plane here, and you'll see that this takes off. It's still detailed. We're still showing the windows and doors with all of the mullions, etc., and the opening lines, but it's taken off all of the line work and shadows and shading on top of that. So that is done with the graphic override with a series of overrides that I mentioned. So like the no shading here, edit the rules, element type is 3D, fill it with background type here. This is fill it with a blank background here. And so this is what takes off the line work or the shading there. The cover fills empty. So these are the ones that we're paying attention to. So again, in that resource pack, you can check this out and see how these work. When you import it, you'll end up with some additional rules that are set up to supplement whatever you've got in your system. So if you think about why would I care about that? Well, sometimes you do want to output your drawings with color and shadows. Sometimes you don't. By having a single marker that is set up for this purpose, you can just have full coordination. If you put some labels, dimensions, etc. on, they will show up in the different views because it's not two different markers. We used to have to create a separate marker for rendered elevations than the plain construction document elevations because the elevation settings locked in whether it was shaded or not shaded. With the graphic override, we can have a single one and just go back and forth. Now you can also have different layers. So remember, each one of these views has a layer combination. And so for example, in the presentation one, we might have a title, south elevation big or something like that. You might have some labels pointing at certain things that are different than in a construction document one where you might turn on the dimensions and other technical notes that you don't want to see on the presentation. So by having a different layer combination, then you can also essentially create two significantly different drawings or output from the same marker and from the same model. Okay, so let's go back to here. So that was graphic overrides for sections and elevations. Clone folders and active folders. Now, if you've been working with ArchiCAD for very long, you probably heard of clone folders. You may use them a lot, you may use them little. I believe that they are awesome for a lot of different reasons. So for example, when I am doing sections here, let's go to a section. All right, well, it has the word clone in here. This is basically a special type of reference to the project map area of the project map called sections. So there are 5 sections, 3 construction document ones and 2 temporary working sections in this model. And you can see there are 5 views here. There's an overall setting for the clone folder that says, and let's come up on the other screen, it says use certain layer combination. So layer combination where we're seeing, the fixtures and equipment and things, but we've turned off the furniture. In this case, we're not seeing any landscaping elements, but we are seeing the ground terrain, so we can see how the footings work, etc. So these settings are used for all views. So if I were to draw a, let's go back to a standard construction document view, and I drop, this section, and then say, hey, I'm going to be putting in, another construction document, and we'll call this section D or something like that. And let's just say we have this view here. Let's do just a view going this way down. Okay, and now this view here right now is showing that the drawing has not been placed on the layout, but let's just look and see that in the clone folder here's that section D. It's already been included. So if I double click on it in the view map, it already is showing the right layers and a lot of the correct information for that. Now, clone folders are great because as you add more sections, they just automatically have the right layers. You don't have to fuss around with this section, I don't have the right layers, let me just change all the settings. It's just automatically there. Now, one thing that can get a little awkward is some resources in your file can become very long, particularly if you have a template that's sort of set up for a lot of different purposes. So for example, the schedules here, if we look at the schedules, you'll see these schedules, there are, I don't know, probably more than 50 different schedules, each one having its own purpose. Not that many are in use in this particular project, but they're all in the template because they could be useful and they could help with construction documents. They're essentially defining a way to analyze and report on the project. So for example, I can have a gross area schedule, and this is just going to report some areas and total them up, helping you to get FAR calculations, etc. You might have glazing areas or shadow calculations. You might have things with cost. You might have things, of course, your door schedules, etc. Well, of all of these ones here, which ones are most useful, or are you currently using? Well, I've created a separate folder rather than a clone folder and put in just the top dozen or whatever, the ones that are currently in use. So if I wanted to add one to the active folder, it still lives in the clone folder. It still has the settings based on whatever was set up in the clone folder. Although note that this one is, if we go to the settings, it's using a layer combination called area calculation, whereas other ones might be using something that would be construction document MEP systems. This is one that I use frequently because when you're showing mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, then a lot of your schedule elements are visible. Walls are visible, all the equipment, etc., are visible here. In any event, this particular one, if I wanted to say I'd like to have it in my active view, because it is one of the ones I'm referring to and working with, you literally can just drag this into the schedule here or put it wherever you want, let go. It did not leave the clone folder because the clone folder by definition always shows every viewpoint in the folder that you're referring to, in this case, the element schedules. But by dragging it in here, it's created an equally good view for that. Let's just go to the cabinet schedules here. This is another example of schedules that are preset in the template. So this is how you can literally have a very fast access thing. And here's worksheets. These are the worksheets that are currently in use. Here's a longer list of worksheets. So any of these clone folders are very good for setting up standards and knowing that every time you create a new viewpoint, it'll be there. But sometimes you want to have a folder that you just define. And the way you create a folder here is you literally just click on this add folder, give it a name, and then that folder will either sit inside something else or sit in between things, whatever, and you can then drop things into it. I'll just get rid of that folder there. Okay, so now we'll go back to this worksheet and see where we're at. So we've gone to clone folders and active folders. So again, you think that could be useful? Let me know. All right, John Ryder. Hey, John, been a while since we talked, so love it. Great ideas. Stuart says enjoying the level of detail. Okay, Miguel says very good to review. From Mickey. All right, showing use of line styles is helpful. Paul says, do you think it's better to use legends and favorites? Okay, favorites are great, particularly since Graphisoft introduced the graphic favorites, the favorites palette with images, etc. But they can get very long. Even though you can organize them in folders, they're in a list. And I do like legends where you can have things grouped and they can go in not just one long list, but be arrayed near each other. So they're both useful. I like legends because of a variety of reasons. One other thing that you can do in legends that you cannot do with favorites is you can have groups of elements, like an entire office or kitchen or bathroom or some landscape elements. You can select it from the legend, copy it, and paste it into your project as a starting point for quickly laying out the kitchen or something else. So with favorites, you can only do one at a time. So that's why legends have a unique place in my workflow. Okay. So Eve says, can you tell me what is an eyedrop? I'm from Asia. Okay. So when you have a little bulb, a little, what do you call it? Well, you can see the symbol up in this corner here. That is the eyedropper. It's also just says pick up parameters. So when you use that, it picks up the settings or the parameters of whatever element you're hovering over when you click. And having done that, your tool is now set to that tool. If it's a wall, you've now got the wall tool active. If it's an object, it'll be the object tool. And it'll be the particular object that you eyedropped, that you clicked on with the eyedropper. And in fact, in some cases, like with the object tool, it'll pick up the anchor point, like which corner you hovered over and clicked on. And that can be helpful by simplifying, hey, when I drop in this cabinet, I want to drop it in from the upper right corner, not the left corner. All right, Rosemary says, if I'm looking at a particular line or element on my screen and I want to change how it looks, how can I tell if it's the raw element or if it's overridden in the view? If it's overridden, how do I know which type of override it is? Okay, so if we are in, let's just say, a, go back to a schematic level view here. So schematic first floor plan. Okay. So obviously, looking at these walls, I can't really tell much difference between the interior and the exterior because they're just two parallel lines. However, if I select this wall, I can see the full details. So for example, it is a composite, not basic, it's composite, and it's made of a certain type of structure there. So we can see the settings in the info box. I can move the info box, by the way, around. I can hover it over this way. I can lock it up at the top. That's how ArchiCAD often is set up in terms of shipping it. I like grabbing this title bar here, the corner, and then putting it and docking it on the left side here. That way it's easier to see more of these than when it goes horizontally. But anyway, when you select it, that's how you would see that. Now, if you want to say, what would this look like if I had no overrides? Well, you can simply go to your graphic overrides and switch to no overrides. You'll have some list of things here. You say no overrides. Now we're going to see it more natural. Then also with the model view options, depends upon your setup, but for example, condoc or construction documents is my most basic one. It shows everything, all the details that are available, including like door and window markers here. The only thing it turns off in that model view option are the zone colors and information. So if I say show zones, this is going to be a little different view. It's going to show, I think it's actually show zone, where is it? I know we have one that says show markups. Oh, it's okay. Should be a view in there that says show zones with colors. Let me just see this. If we go to our space planning zones and go here, there we have it. And that's using drafting design show zones. All right, that's actually, yeah, that's what I thought I was looking at. But oh, that's in the model view options, and it's showing the zones. Okay, so in any event, you can manually go and switch, for example, to whatever is your most basic model view option that shows all of the details for these things, and then you can switch also to have no overrides. And now we're seeing most everything. This condoc one is turning off, I guess, the color of the zones so that you can see certain information about the zone, the floor area, the floor surface, but not the other stuff. So there you have it. All right, so Ben says you should consider adding some graphic override rules for controlling how Earth looks, hatched, solid, white, or empty. Interesting. Okay. Ben, if you want to send me a quick note, because this will probably disappear. I won't look at it later. But if you just send a note to support@bobrow.com, I'd like to just see what you have set up, because I think that could be very useful. All right, and Ahmed said this is very useful. Okay, I'm seeing some comments now in our Slack workspace. So those of you who are in my ArchiCAD training programs or coaching calls, you have the opportunity to discuss with each other and share ideas. So Mark says, is there some place in ArchiCAD where you can adjust font selection and cases for the project as a whole? No, unfortunately. All elements with text in them are independent, so you can select all the text elements on a plan or on a separate story and change them, but you're only affecting the ones in that view. And labels are different than text, so you have to select all the labels and do that. And every section, elevation, detail, etc., each one you would have to do that if you wanted to wholesale switch from Arial to Tecton or something like that. So unfortunate, there's no graphic override to just say, hey, wherever there's text, change this. So it is a gap in terms of that type of management. Okay, John Dunham says, do the clone folders for schedules always have the same layer combo, or can that be different for each separate schedule? It can be different. So in a clone folder, the top level folder defines the starting point for all the views, but each individual view, or you can select multiple ones, you can select it and go to the settings and change whatever you want. In detail drawings, you might say, my details, a good sort of average starting point would be 1 inch to a foot, or 1 to 10 if you're metric. And then you can say, well, but this one needs to be bigger. So I'll select it and say it's 3 inches to a foot, etc. So it could be layers, or it could be scale, or anything else for that particular worksheet or schedule or detail. Okay, let's move on. Got so much to cover here, but made some good progress. Okay, so we are, whoops, and I keep thinking there. All right, so we have done clone folders and active folders, optimizing the 3D window view. Well, this is something, has a few little subtleties I'd like to bring up for you. So we'll take a view of the, all right, now I've got all these sketch views here. Let's go to, and the legends, turn those, close those up. Let's go to this overall view here. Now, right now, this view is set with what I think are pretty nice settings for making it pop and read clearly. And one thing I love about ArchiCAD 23 are some of the textures. In fact, in general, how the textures have been enhanced. Look for a moment at this grass. It's sort of like a watercolor wash. It doesn't look repetitive. And if you compare that with earlier versions of ArchiCAD, the grass in general would look just like this little funky stipple pattern that's very repetitive and very artificial. This looks sort of artistic. And if you go to any of the textures for building materials like brick or wood, they're much higher resolution in 23. You know, I really struggled with getting everything integrated for master template, I had to bring in the Graphisoft's new versions of the surfaces. That was actually pretty easy, but we have dozens and dozens of additional surfaces in master template that make it easy to get certain types of effects. And I actually, with the help of an architect up in Canada, Michael Boreski, we've gone through and optimized all of those dozens of additional surfaces. So in general, they have more resolution. Now, separate from that, you notice the lines on the roof edges, they're a little black. Well, there are different options here. For example, in the standard template, I believe both in the US and in international use, they would use the same set of pens that you would have on the plan. So in this case, GSNA, Graphisoft North America ArchiCAD View pens. When I select that, you can see these lines sort of disappear. Why? Because they're being drawn with the gray pen that is on the floor plan for the roof, and the line work of the stone is a little bit brown. And you look at the sort of red edges of the what do you call it? Of this part of the roof, because that one is set for red. Now, all I did was I switched from the pen set in this save view from the standard one to one that I had created that says all black, some gray. When I switch that, you can see how it pops just a little bit more. Now let's just look at that pen set, pens in colors, and say, you notice I've just made almost all of them black, except for some of the ones that are deliberately for a ramp. And if we compare that to the standard view pens, you can see that this section stayed the same. So what did I do? I basically selected a bunch of pens, like from here to here, double clicked on this, left it at black because that's what it is, said okay, it now is black, and I repeated this in other areas. This is custom. I then said store and gave it a name. So now that one that's called all black, some gray is available, and it comes up with, I think, a nice crisper look. Another thing that you'll notice is that it's rather bright. If I rotate, if I rotate around, it's still rather bright, even this part that's dimmer and with shadows here, it's still not too bad. Now in the standard views in ArchiCAD, they generally have a different level of sunlight. So if I go, let's see, I go here to go to the view menu, 3D view options, and right now here's the 3D projection settings for this view. Go to sunlight. It's a little bit buried in here, although there are other ways to get here. This is set to max it out. You may think that's extreme, and it is, but I like it that way. Now the standard one is something like I think 95 and 60, and I don't know if this is 100 or maybe it's like 80 or something like that. Now you see the preview, it sort of says, oh, it's bright here, and we can see some shading and shadow, and you'll see some nice delineation, etc. Well, let's just look at what that does. So that's rather dull to me. It just really doesn't pop. And so I like changing that line work on the edge. So here's sort of what you might normally have is this line work here, and everything's sort of dull, right? Now if I go into the save view, it pops. Okay. You also have some other flexibility. You might want to consider going to the 3D view options, 3D styles. And while you can choose one of these presets, let's look at one other setting that I like to adjust is the contours. We can say the contour lines, which are, these ones here, I want to make this a little thicker. Let's do 3. You can see the preview change. We say OK. Now, that's a rather different look. It's almost like a SketchUp type of look. You might find this is better when you're working with clients in the early stages because it doesn't look like it's finished. It looks more like it's a conceptual model. So you can set that up. Now, whatever you set up here, if I go to the settings, I can say get current Windows settings. That's going to adjust this particular view. Or, of course, I can just say save the current view and have it. So let's just say save this current view, and we'll do test 3D here. All right, so now you can see I can go from test 3D to the other one. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, you know what? I apologize. My confusion is that we'll just go to the test 3D here. I'll go to the 3D styles here. By the way, 3D styles were introduced into ArchiCAD 20 or 21. I've just changed the one that's called shading and shadows to have the heavier contours. Let me put it back to this, and let's create a new version, which I'll just call it heavy contours. All right, so now I've got a new one here, and I've changed the one that was shading and shadows back to the original. But the heavy contours, I'll make this up at 3. I'll make it 4, make it really strong. So there we have that. And I'm going to say for this view, I think I can even right click and say redefine with current window settings. So now that's going to pick up this window settings. And if I go back to the AXO, so here is the one that I had. I think it's a nice subtle compromise. And here's one you can use. So I like having more light, having a different pen set for 3D to make it black for most edges. And then you may consider also changing your contours. At least that's an option. So let's go here to these tricks. All right, optimizing the 3D window view. Now, as I've been demonstrating, I've been saving 3D views as I go along, and you can see how nice it is to be able to just double click and it comes up with a particular view and a particular style of view. Well, let's look at some more styles. In the master template, we've got just a huge number of different styles. And while I can't show you all of them, and there's, you'll get the idea from just a few of them, these are all different styles as well as viewpoints. Okay, so if I go to AXO plan status, here we have it. I go to AXO existing. Well, this is a view that changes. You notice how this part changed? That's because I've got the renovation filter here in this particular view. And where did it go off screen? Well, there it is. It's on my other screen here. Okay, so it's saying existing. When I double click on plan status, it's that. So that's a layer, that's a renovation status. Of course, I can also have views that say turn off the shadow. So this turned off the shadow. So sometimes you just want to do that. We may want to show it in a style of hidden line. So this is totally different. This is, again, just changing our 3D style. Now, here we're seeing it with all the detail, but I can say simple AXO hidden line. And what do we have? I now have done that schematic option for the models view, model view options. So these are just different views. And there's another variation here with a white model. This one is line work, and it has certain benefits, but the white model one is quicker and will spin around instantly, whereas the hidden line one, if I do that, what you'll see is that it will go into this wireframe. Why? Because it's using a totally different 3D style. It's using a vectorial style, which can be very precise, and you can see the level of detail that it's able to do when we zoom in on this. Every line is carefully delineated here, but if we go to the white model one, it's just much quicker to do that. In this case, I've got the simple model, so it's showing the railing just as surfaces. Now, of course, we can be looking in perspective. So let's look at a front perspective view. So these are saved views. You can place a camera down on the plan to record it. You can have different views from different angles here. So that was existing and new. You can see how that bumped out. If I go to the rear perspective, that's one that is looking straight, looking at the building, and it has a rather odd distortion there. We can go to the 2-point perspective, which subtly corrects it and makes everything vertical. That's done using the view menu, 3D view. Let's see, it's 3D what is it, 3D navigation extras, and horizontal view, no, horizontal view, where is it? It's all of a sudden now no, I can't remember where that that one for 2-point perspective is. 3D view options, yeah. So yeah, where is it? There, okay. Well, in any event, that's a save view there. So each one of these, if notice that this one is sort of darker from the back, and this one is bright. The reason is that I've moved the sun around, so you can save a view in your 3D projection settings where the sun is coming from a different angle. In this case, the sun is hard to see. It's this little symbol there. Let's just go to the rear perspective, no sun here, and again use that shortcut for 3D projection settings and move the sun from this side of the building up to that side, up in this area, and say okay. And you can see didn't change much there. 3D projection settings, the sun coming from here. That's odd. All right, well, we'll have to move on because that normally when you move the sun around, it should change that view. Now let's look at some other specialized views that have been put together here. So for example, see-through walls, we're looking at the building in a natural view, except the wall layers are made in wireframe. If I go to the layer combination here, you'll see that we're in a layer combination that's specifically for this purpose, and it's got these wall layers in wireframe. Maybe a little hard to see here, but when you click on the little symbol next to the number, it will flip back and forth between wireframe and solid, and in this case all the walls are made wireframe. So this is a save view. Sometimes this can be good because you can then move around the building and person can visualize where certain elements are that might be hard to understand. We can do other things like structural highlights. So what is this? This has got, it's turning off some of the outer skin of the building and just using a graphic override to turn it red. Or we can have something that's framing is highlighted here. So again, we're doing a wireframe of this, but it's actually, this is done with a graphic override option. We have a rule here that says if it's 3D, make it airspace so you can see right through it and give it a light gray outline. And if it's structural framing, override that and say anything that's on certain structural layers, we're going to make it just a structural wood here. So that's what's giving us this effect. Now we can also save marquee cutaways. So you know how you can draw a marquee on the plan and then say show this in 3D? Well, you can go here to a cutaway like this. So this is, we can save that view. As soon as you have one in front of you, you can say, hey, that's a useful one. I want to go back to that. And this is still live. So I can move around, I can go in and select elements, and change them, change the settings of elements here. So this is just a saved way of looking at the model with the cutaway. Now that particular view here shows the framing of the building. Let's take a look at another option which hides that, because maybe you don't want to focus on that. Cutaway AXO red. Well, how is this handled? Well, this is by changing the setting under the view menu, elements in 3D view, filter and cut elements in 3D. So right now we're cutting with a marquee, and wherever we cut, we're using a setting to make it red. Now you could make it black, you could make it anything you want, but here's what it's chosen. And when I go back to this other save view for natural, and we go back to that same place, filter and cut elements, then you can see it says use element attributes. So these are saved views there. Now, we can also have sun studies. So a sun study, looking straight down, so it's a saved view with the sun at a particular time of day based on the heliodon that ArchiCAD has built in. So if we go to the 3D projection settings, we're going to see the sun is at a certain point in space, and we can look, actually not there, it's we can go to date and time. I guess in this case, it's not, this is the correct position for that particular view, but it's not showing that it's a date and time. I'm a little puzzled. If we go to sun study 3 o'clock, this is 9 a.m., this would be 3 o'clock, you can see the sun has moved over, and basically that's set up by choosing a date and time, and of course you have to coordinate your project location so that ArchiCAD can do a good calculation there. But those are saved views there. Now let's look at a cutaway with a marquee like this. And I'll just again mention that look at the earth and look at the grass or the top of this surface. It is really, to me, very elegantly done. If you compare that with ArchiCAD 22 and earlier, it was just so much cruder, so much uglier. And this is sort of cool. It's just really cool. Now, I'm going to point out a couple of things here. One is you can see these elements that are cut through, and when I zoom in on them, we've got the cross lines that indicate that it's cut through. And I'm going to show you in a minute how that's done and some subtle things about that that I've discovered through a lot of experimentation. Now, if we look here at a 3D view, we can right click on any 3D view and say, create a new 3D document. Now I've got a 3D document from that original view. Let's go back to the, where is it? This particular one. I'll double click, it'll put it back to the same view. And I created a 3D document here that's annotated. So when you create the 3D document, it's going to show, of course, all the elements, but it's going to switch the viewing mode to be a shaded view and a symbolic representation of, let's say in this case, we're seeing the earth and the concrete. If we zoom in on it, we'll see, just something that symbolically represents the concrete. Now, in a 3D view, you can dimension these elements. So if you go to the dimension tool, you can actually dimension, to a point and another point, and take this and, that's the 8 inches going off this way. So that's something you can do in a 3D document. Now, what I'll point out is that this label here is not, when I double click on it, I can't really edit it because it's one bunch of text. Why is that? Because it's actually the drawing note, and there's a little note reference here. So this particular element, if I open up its settings and we look at the classifications and properties, you can see this thing that says wood beam seated on bearing, and it goes on there. So this is text that is in the element. And if we were to annotate this anywhere else on a plan or a section or another 3D view, it would have that information. Whereas this label is just something that I can edit. And so you can put in, of course, labels that are just totally write the text that's appropriate for this view, but you can also have ones that are referencing the building element. So if I select this building element here, you'll see another way of looking at it is using the properties area here, and this is a drawing note. So I'm going to show you a little bit about properties in a moment as well, because properties are something that were added in over the last few years. They've been added and expanded in dramatic ways. They give you the ability to carry over information from one view to another, put them into schedules, etc. Okay, so let us see with my notes. I know I had a sequence here. 3D window, save 3D views. Okay. Oh, so here's another, just a simple final one for the 3D save views, and that is a cutaway for a section. Now, if I do this cutaway for a section, all right, this looks like it is a sectional view, although it's rendered, but it is actually a 3D view. It's a marquee that was drawn on the plan that just matches where the section is cut. Now that section doesn't have to be straight on or just a rectangular cut. In the case of this particular section, it's got a jog. And with the marquee tool, when you have the marquee tool, you can choose whether you're going to be doing a jogged or an irregular shape or a rectangular shape. This is slightly different because we're in a 3D view, but you'll notice that this is actually a live 3D view that's been saved to match that particular jogged section. So let's take a look at the framing and then the drawing notes there. So how do we have this framing? Okay, so this is an element that's a beam. The beam is a complex profile. So complex profiles are a snapshot of what you would see in a section. If I go and edit this, you'll see that it looks like that framing, and it's actually made up of several different pieces here as opposed to one. Let's take a look at this in a more natural context, in the sense of if we put in framing for a wall. So if we go back to that 3D view here and zoom out. Okay, so we have, for example, this wall here is a complex profile. Say I want to, actually I have to make sure I only have one element selected. Select this and edit this profile, and we'll see this particular wall is set up. You can see it looks like a composite from a distance, but as we get closer, we can see that we have the framing here, and it's again broken up into several pieces. So let's see how you create something like that and some of the little subtleties that make this a little bit challenging at first to work with. So let's go back to the plan, and let me put in a wall here, and let's just I'll eyedrop this interior wall that doesn't have any framing here. It is a composite rather than a complex profile. So I'm going to actually right click on this, and I do capture. No, they don't have it here anymore. I think they did at one point, but if I select it, I can go to the options, complex profiles, capture profile of selection. So this is going to give me an option to edit this custom profile, which you can see has just the skins, and each one of these, this is the drywall, this is the framing space, that's the other drywall. Well, I'm going to go in and use a fill to delineate the bottom plate. So I'll select this fill. I'll say that it is made out of something like wood, light frame, horizontal, something like that, and just draw a little rectangle, and I'll say that the height of it, the dimension 2, is going to be 1 1/2, or whatever that's supposed to be. Okay, there. Now, if I save this, it was custom, so I get a name here. So we'll say new interior wall with framing. So obviously it's just starting, but we're going to create that, and it's set up for walls. Now, if I go to a plan view and we go to the wall tool, I can choose to put in, actually let's deselect that. Let's just put this in separately. I'm going to go in, put in the wall tool as a complex profile and say the new interior wall with framing, and let's just pop this in next to that, and let's just do a little marquee and compare what we've got. All right, so we can see here, this is not showing. This is the new interior wall there. So what is going on? It probably is using a similar one there. Let's go and edit this, and let's, oh, I know this main part, it hasn't been pulled back, so I need to pull this back here. And let's just say save this, and then we'll go to that cutaway, and now you can see where we've got some framing, but I'm not seeing the cut line. So how would you do that? Well, when you're in the complex profile window, you can use the line tool and you can draw like this, but this is considered drafting guidelines. So the line tool is considered drafting. To show you the difference, construction are the 3D and drafting are 2D information. If I turn off construction, we can see that I'm only seeing this line work and some supplemental guides. Turn this on, turn off the drafting, and you can see that disappears. So the drafting can help to lay things out, but really it's not going to make this have that X on it. So what do? We select this fill, and we can split it along this line. And now we have an upper piece, and we can split that. Actually, we can then split both of these along the other diagonal. And now we're going to have 4 individual pieces. See? So let's just say save this. And now we'll go to that cutaway. And you can see there's that line work. So that's how you can do that. And of course, you can put one at the top in there. Now, one of the issues is that if you want to use this for freestanding framing, like what you were seeing in the joists, there are some things you have to keep in mind. ArchiCAD, when it sees 2 surfaces next to each other that are the same, like you have 2 walls that maybe have different heights, but they're next to each other, and they have the same surface, it will remove the line. Or if you stack 2 walls, it'll remove the line. Basically, if it's the same surface and it's the same plane, it will say, you wouldn't see a difference. So let's just see if I were to go, and let's go back to the plan and take the beam tool. And I'm going to just do something with, I have a complex, let's go to a complex profile, and we'll take one that is framing. And let's do framing general. This is one that I've created here. And I'm going to do this off to the side here. And we'll put a copy of it. We'll drag a copy. Oops, okay. Drag a copy there. Okay, and let's just select these 2 and do a little marquee. So we're looking now at just those 2 elements. All right, so looks good there. Now, if I were to take this one and drag it to on top of that, you notice how there's no line in between, even though on this face there is. Well, what I need to do is to either, if you think about it, if the top surface of this is the same as the top surface of that, then we don't see a line. Now, we could potentially switch this from the one that I've got framing general to framing general 2. Now, what's the difference between these 2? They're using some different building materials. So ArchiCAD is saying, oh, actually you are changing from one building material to another. So this is something that I ended up having to work with. We'll just see how this works. If I say edit this selected composite, we'll see that this one is a building material called wood framing. This one is wood framing 2. This one, if I hover over it, you see it says wood framing 3 and wood framing 4. So by having them 4 different ones, it allows me to see the distinction between them. But then when I put them side by side with another one, the top surface of this matched the other one. So if I go to the Framing General 2, we'll see that the top surface here is wood framing 7. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've found that by creating two similar framing members with different building materials, that I can make sure that the line work shows. And if we go to the building materials in master template, what I've set up here is wood framing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and also a separate one called wood structural 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these for wood structural I'm using it for the really heavy timber. And there are times when you're stacking and aligning things together that these things are required. So that's a little trick there, is to, of course, make that X. You don't have to worry about this inside a wall because you're not going to be putting the framing, you're not going to have it exposed in the same way. But if you do want to see these diagrams like what I showed here, so we'll just close this up to the cutaway here. You can see the elements, this is it's a profile called Framing Structural, whereas this one is a profile called Framing General. And if I were to put two side by side, I'd need to make one Framing General and one Framing General 2, for example. All right, so that's a little tip about doing framing in your ArchiCAD model. And if we go to now just the notes that I was showing here. So I've mentioned this thing about annotated reference. So here we can see the wood beam seated on bearing plate. Let's go to a different view and pick up that same information. So if I go to the cutaway large marquee, so this is a view, the area we were zoomed in on was this area, and this element here is the same one as we were just pointing out, and it has this information here because this is the same element. It's in the properties. Let's look at how we could annotate this. If we wanted to do this, I'll go to the view menu, let's see, or document, 3D document, new 3D document. That's one way to do it, and it'll actually capture this one. Or we can right click in empty space and say new 3D document from this view. And then if I go to the label tool and say that, I'll want to have the right layer combination. So this would be a condoc of some sort, construction document, just say sections or something like that. There now, if I go to the layer or the label and say I want to associate it with an element and hover over this element here. So now you can see it's highlighted that one, and then I can do, let's see, this, let me just change the, I guess, the other little thing is that we want to be able to place it with multiple clicks rather than just a standard little, often a certain orientation. So this way I can go hover over this, do a setting here, and then I can, instead of typing in, just plain text, I can go to the parameters and properties here. And in this case, if I type in note, you can see there's drawing note. That was the property that I was referring to earlier, and I double click on that, and you can see it shows this note here. And if this would work differently on each element. So if I now go and I drop this as a setting and go to, let's say, I think like this one, you can see that it's picked up the setting of that element. So whatever element I'm pointing at, if there is a note associated with it, this particular label setting will pick that up because the label default is now saying pick up the drawing note. The little pound sign means that it's a reference to a property. So where are those property, where do they live? And let's just get this. Of course, we could pull this down. We can change the font size, etc. But where do these live? This is under the options menu, property manager. Now properties, this is going to be a very, very brief description here, but I will spend a little bit more time in a moment to look at some other things that you can do with properties. So properties are basically, like here's the drawing note. All we have to do is say new, and let me just say I wanted to do drawing note 2, something like that. You can choose which group it's going to be. You can see these are organized with headings, and say OK. And you can see it just added it in below. And this is a string, means just text that you can fill in, but you could also have it restricted to being numbers, or it could be a length, could be other settings. So the text string we can then edit on the fly. So it's just a way of storing information for elements. And you can also then say, hey, I'd like it available for all elements of all types, because its drawing notes might be applied to many different types of things, or we can say it's only available to certain things, like, for example, combustible is only available for certain types of element, or thermal transmittance, or fire resistance. These things are steel type. So each one of these might have different settings. In this case, we're doing it for all. So that's where this lives in terms of the property manager. And as a property, let's just see if I have this element selected, you'll be able to see it either under the ID and properties here, or you can go down to the lowest section of most dialog boxes will have the classifications and properties, and here this is. So this, if I change this, I'll just write in special here. So I've just changed this. Look at what happens when I click OK down there. That's special bearing plate. Look at what happens if I go to the other 3D document that I had. You can see there's that word special. So it basically, whatever I put in for that element is going to show up in all the different views, including if I were to go onto a foundation plan, this would be the same thing. So if I go and take this is the element here. So let's go to the label tool, hover over that element, and there we have that note, which of course is a little bit out of the way, but there is that same note with the word special. So that's something that is a really powerful trick, is to put information that you want to refer to in multiple different views, or even in schedules and reports, and put it into a property field and then refer to it in your labels and in schedules. Okay, so let's look at some comments. Here we're at the 90-minute mark, so I'm saying we'll go no more than 2 hours, and I do have a special guest who will jump in shortly to show us about 10 minutes of some extra stuff. Okay, so Ahmed says, very useful, thank you. Chris says, can you do a vertical complex profile for vertical timber cladding? Graphisoft told me to use more for curtain wall object, which is not very practical. No, you cannot do a vertical complex profile, because a complex profile is basically an extrusion of a section. This is true for walls, and it's true for beams. Like you can have a beam that's, a piece of steel, so it's got a shape like an H or, or whatever, a C-shape steel. Now you can do columns, so you can make something vertical. It's a column that's a piece of steel, or steel with veneer, various things like that. But you can't say, as I move along the wall, repeat the cladding gaps. So it's unfortunately not available. Sorry. The way that you'd have to do that, yeah, you could do things with morphs. You can do some things sometimes with just subtractions. So you could use like the grid tool, or the grid element in ArchiCAD, there's an object that's a grid, and you can say, I want to put a grid that would be, at least at the beginning, would be a bunch of thin members, thin elements, and then use that as a subtraction if you wanted to have little grooves. So that would be an interesting way to do it. You can have that on a layer that's hidden, and then, but use it to essentially brand some vertical indentations. See if you might be able to take that. Ahmed says, as a beginning user of ArchiCAD, is there a way to create a master list of keynotes for the entire project, one similar to Revit, where the keynote is linked to a table and a list of keynotes used on that sheet are the only ones showing in that table? So there is an add-on for ArchiCAD called Keynotes. It's made by a company called CAD Image, C-A-D-I-M-A-G-E, just like it sounds, CAD Image. They are based in New Zealand, and they make this a number of different add-ons for ArchiCAD that are quite powerful and useful. One of them is called Keynotes, and it'll do exactly what you are asking. You can associate with elements notes. Those notes can be reported based on a particular view, like only the things that we're seeing in this particular drawing. Like, you know, you may have 100 notes in the project, but only 10 of them are in elements that are referenced, and you'll see only those 10 notes. And it can also be set for the sheet. So you can say, hey, I have these 3 elevations on the sheet, and it'll only have the notes relevant to those. So Keynotes, it's not cheap, but it's not expensive if you really want that. Other than that, you can report on things in schedules, and in those schedules you can do some criteria saying, I only want to report appliances. Well, how do you do that? Well, you have a list of objects and you say only if they're on the appliance layer, or maybe they're objects on the mechanical, but they have an ID that says AP, or P for plumbing or something like that. So you can do schedules that report data based on criteria, but those schedules can't report based on what drawings are on the sheet or what's in that particular view specifically. So the CAD Image Keynotes is something you might want to check out. Rosemary Muller says, why use a special pen set rather than graphic override or renovation override for pens and colors? I suppose you could probably get a similar effect for that, probably work equally well. So you could experiment with that. Okay, and under 3D visualization, Tekla says, I'm not sure what the question is. Mackenzie, hey Mackenzie, are your framing members complex profiles to get the X, or is that a new setting in the beam tool? They are complex profiles. Okay, Tekla says, very ingenious. The crossing in the timber framing is awesome. Okay, so John Ryder says, CAD Image tools covering. So that's another thing for those vertical timber cladding. CAD Image has something called coverings. Again, you have to pay for it, but you can try it out for free. I think you can do it for a couple of weeks or 30 days. Basically you can use certain settings to put a surface on top of a wall, with these timbers. And you can also do things like having real tiles on top of the roof. And if the roof changes, you make the roof bigger or change its slope, the covering will adjust. So CAD Image coverings. Okay, so Uche says, great stuff, Eric. Any chance that you have recorded this as well? Yes, it is being recorded and it will be posted. Okay, Rich Matthews says, I've always find something from your webinars, no matter how simple, that will save me time and effort in the future. Awesome. You got up early? Well, actually, it's not so bad this time of year. It's probably 8 a.m. where you are, or started at 8. All right, Saxon says, what is the current default pen set? 10? No, Saxon, you've been carrying forward projects from earlier versions. In ArchiCAD 18, Graphisoft changed the pen set to say, instead of, let's see, I do have this historically here. There were, oh no, I think we've simplified it in master template because it just was not necessary. It used to be ArchiCAD US default pen set 10 or US, something like that, and it was carried across to 11, 12, 13, 14, and it always looked funny. Well, we're using the one from 10 because it's good. They created a new one for 18 with some subtle changes, and then last year, I think, they changed it entirely to GSNA ArchiCAD view pens and layout pens. So in the standard ArchiCAD environment in the US, those are your two built-in options for this. Now you can see I've got other ones, like the electrical plan is going to make most things gray, and only the electrical elements would be set to use a pen that it pops out as a solid black. And we have ones for AutoCAD to match, when you bring in an AutoCAD drawing, if you want to be able to talk to your consultant and say, the green lines over in this area, what are they? And you'll know that it's the same color on your screen as on their screen. Okay, all right. So let's see if there are any other things. So there are, Henry, just a general question to the group. How many of you still frame using 2 by 10 or 2 by 12 joists, or do most use pre-built floor trusses? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so we are 2:38. I have, where am I at with my thing? So I'll just show you go back to our ones here. We did framing. We've done drawing notes. Visualizing limits. This is a fun one, and it's very quick to demonstrate. And I want to thank ahead of time Jared Banks for him showing this in a video, and I went, that's brilliant. So I've incorporated it into master template. It's very easy for anyone to do. So what do I mean by this? Okay, well, let's go to our plan. Okay, so we can go to our plan. Now, there may be some setback lines. So let's actually go to the site plan. So we have a lot of things open. We'll close this up, and we'll go to site, and we'll go to site plan here. All right, so here is a version of a site plan. I wouldn't say I'm particularly proud of it for, in terms of it being elegant, but it does communicate where the building is and the site and some of the landscaping there. Now I'm going to double click on plan site with limits. Okay, now when I do that, you can see some red lines show up. So if we imagine this is a rectangular site, these red lines might be the setback line saying you can build only up to this location. And I've deliberately placed those lines here. Let me just grab this one, and we'll just move it to the display order to the front here. Okay, so what are these lines? Well, of course, they can be just lines, but in this case, this is not just a line. This is a wall. Well, why would I do a wall? Because I want to visualize that condition in 3D. Now, the wall is pretty thin. In fact, actually 0 thickness. Did you know that you can make walls that are 0 thickness? You can. Then on the plan, it's going to be a line there. And it's going from -2'8" to 20 feet. So it's basically going up in space 2 stories there. It's made of a building material called solid element operators. Oh, it's just a building material. That particular one you'll see in a moment is set up to be translucent so you can see through it. Now, if I go to this save view, Axo site with contours, here is that wall that we were just looking at. It's passing through here. So I'm visualizing the fact that this particular addition might be just a little over the limit. Now, you know as well as I do that sometimes you push the limits and you actually get a variance. You get permission to say, yeah, we're going to do something just a little bit beyond, and you request permission. And if you are smart and you pick and choose your battles, you might get permission. So this is a way to see it. So by laying out these limit lines on the plan, you can sort of see, are you within your guidelines or not? And if you want to push the limits, you at least see them. And then look, as we zoom out, what the heck is this thing? Well, if you look carefully at it, it's following the terrain. It is actually a mesh, just like this one. And in fact, it's a copy of the mesh. Now, this mesh is set up to be a solid volume. So when we're cutting through in sections, we see the earth here in this sort of outside view, or when we cut through in section, whereas this one is set to be just a skin. So what I did was I took this particular terrain, made a copy of it, dragged it up a certain distance, and then changed it to be a a skin rather than a volume, and change the material of the top surface, or the material in general, to be this solid element operator. So now we can see through it. So here we have something where, you know, there are going to be some cases where you're told, or where the law is, the zoning is, that you can't have anything above a certain distance from the original grade. And so you can go up to that point, and that changes depending on where you are on the site. So this is a way to visualize, and I've arbitrarily sort of cut it down here so it's you know, showing that we're up about 2 or 3 feet, you know, up here. But it's just a way to demonstrate visually that that this is a way to show it. So if you were to have something and you just had the steeple, you just had the, you know, this little detail above, you know, you can present, hey, you know, this is what we need to get a variance for. So that visualizes it. Now this is a simple case of just straight up, you know, 25 feet or whatever that is. But in other cases, you might have some sloping things. Say, you know, there's some sight lines, or, you know, other, I forget what they call it, you know, 45 degrees from this line here, other envelope constraints. So you could use morphs, you could use other things to just create a volume that shows what's legitimate and what's not. You might actually have it be a solid volume and the building is inside it, and maybe some parts of the building stick outside of that volume. So that's with limits. So what do you need to do to make this happen? Well, it's very simple. You need to have a layer. So this is a layer combination. Makes it easy to do that. We have a special layer called special limits. So that's the layer where I put these special things on. I only show it in this one layer combination. You can see that this has got an eyeball. These are all off, except for when I'm working on the template or show and unlock everything. So the limits, you know, are something that you can just draw with any element and then show it when you want to. And of course, the building material, if we go to the building material for this, the one called solid element operators here, this one, it's using a surface called solid element operators. You could name it anything you like, but that surface, if we go to surfaces, and this is actually part of the standard US template. I don't imagine it's probably in the international one, but the solid element operators, you can see, is this translucent one. It's basically got 50% transmittance, so it's allowing things to be seen 50% through that red color. All right, so that is visualizing limits. Thanks to Jared Banks for opening my eyes to that. So we're at quarter 2. I'm going to show you very briefly quantity formulas, and then I will hand it over to John Hallgarth, who will show you how far you can take quantity analysis in your ArchiCAD project. But let me know if any of these last things were interesting. Okay, all right, so Saxon, you have a question. Yeah, not a good time, can't fit that in, but you can contact me, you have my number. All right, Dave says, how long has this been around? Could you do it with a zone? You can use zones to visualize things, absolutely, and so that may be something. You can have the zone with a shape and trim it by you know, a mesh. You know, there are some things you could do with zone. So yes, that might be a way to do it. All right. Okay, so let us go to the quantity formulas, and I'm going to make sure that John, let's see if John is in the audience here. He said he would jump in later on. There we go, John. Hey, John. Oh, actually, I've opened up your line, and I'm going to make, well, I'll make you a presenter when it comes time. So, John, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me introduce my colleague, John Hallgarth of Contrabim. John has been an ArchiCAD user for a long time and specialized in construction. So he worked for a general contractor on large projects and figured out a really great workflow for estimating and managing projects using ArchiCAD. So I'm going to show you a junior version of what John's put together. This junior version is what anybody can do in ArchiCAD. If you want to do what John has got, which he'll show you in about 5 minutes, you'll want to get the system that he's put together. And in fact, I've been working with him on a system we call ARC5D. So more details on that in a couple of minutes. So let's go to, I'm in ArchiCAD, and let's look at properties one more time. So property manager. So we were looking at the drawing note. It's just text. So basically, when you have an element that is one of these classifications, in this case, all maybe all classifications, we can add a note. It'll show up in the special property area. You can use it as a label, and you can put it in a schedule, because in schedules you can pull up any of that data. Now you'll notice that there are some ones here, let me widen this out, that say cost factor is a number. So, basically I just named this. I said instead of it being a string of text, it's a number. So basically when you type in something, it's going to force it to be numeric. If you typed in letters, it wouldn't go. And it can be used as a number in calculations like multiplying. So cost factor in this case, if it was a piece of equipment, it would be the dollar value or the number of pounds or euros. It's $875 or whatever. There's a cost unit. So what is the cost unit? Well, the cost unit could be, linear feet, cubic yards, or each. So in the simple case, if it's discrete elements, you'd say it's 875 each. In the case of steel, you might say it's $28 per linear foot. Or in the case of walls, you might say best way to estimate the cost on walls is the square footage of the face of the wall. Now, John's got something that will actually calculate all the skins and the framing and everything, but this is for conceptual estimates, or quick estimates, calculations. And if you did want to do a rough ballpark price based on square footage or square meters, you could be saying that if I'm drawing some zones, that these zones here are a certain level and they're going to cost $350 per square foot, but over here, this is the garage or the storage space or something else, and it's going to be $220 per square foot. So you can put in a unit that's square foot, square meters in metric, and you can have a cost factor. Now, this is just an option for choosing that. Then you'll see that the cost can be this formula. So this is a very complex formula that I'll just briefly open up to show. It's really going to be a little hard. Where did it go? I just double clicked on it. Where did it go? It went off to this other screen. So you can see all these gray things. These are referencing like the cost unit. If the cost unit is each, then you take the cost factor and you just use that. But if the cost unit is linear feet, then you take the cost unit and you multiply it by the linear feet here. So there's different things. So basically this is a smart calculation that's going to say, I'm going to calculate the cost based on what type of element it is and what type of unit you're working with, and you'll end up with a report that'll say, if it was for zones, they're measured by area and they have a certain cost value. So let's just see if I have zones in here in the schedule. I think we go down to our schedules. And this is going to be just so abbreviated, but John will show you where we can go with this. So if I go to zones here, so these zones are the rooms in the building. And let's just make this a little bigger. So you can see the cost factor here, and here's the area. So let's look at the living room, 293 square feet. Let's just say that it is 300 here, $300 per square foot, $88,000 for that. Put in the utility room. Maybe this is $200 per square foot. This is going to multiply that, and here's what we've got. So we can put in some values in here for your zones and end up with some calculations, and it can sum this up. Now, right now, it looks like the scheme settings for this, I'd want to do a summary calculated cost. Isn't that in there? Estimated cost here. I guess what I need to do, if I wanted to have a total for each story, then I would say we want to have the calculated cost, and we want to break it up by story here. Actually, no, it's by story here. And then we say OK. And you can
Hey,
see
Eric.
now, this is the cost for this story. That's the cost for the other one. I haven't put any dollar values, and this is now the total. So that's an example of just how properties can be used in a simple case to get a conceptual estimate or a target estimate for your building based on areas. So John, I'm going to pass it over to you. I'm going to make you presenter so you can show something that just goes, that was like kindergarten, maybe first grade or something like that. And I'm going to make you presenter, John, here. So, and John, you want to put on your webcam if you have that available?
Yeah, let's see if we can get that going.
All right. So John's been working on this whole workflow for years, and this year we put together something together. So show us what you got.
Yeah, can you see my screen?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, thanks for inviting me back on, Eric. So one of the things that we had talked about a little bit, just that we thought we could share with everyone, is kind of how we can go from generating some of these interactive schedules in ArchiCAD and how we can get that information out and into Excel to either continue working on there or to run some cost calculations, or to ultimately, I think the goal is to really take all these reports and start building up a estimate and an estimate summary so that we can really see the overall cost impact, and then we can start adding additional markups that we need, whether it's general conditions or general requirements, permits, inflation. There's all these other types of markups that we typically want to add on top of a subtotal. So I thought, and what we had kind of talked about was maybe showing just a few different ways that we can get information out of ArchiCAD into Excel where we can continue to work on it and manipulate it further. So what I have pulled up here just as a quick example file is this is actually an example file. Some of you may have seen this before in some previous videos we did, but this is a project that was essentially donated to us. This was done in Eric's template, in master template. And what we've done here is we've loaded it up with the ContraBIM 5D estimating framework so that we have all these different reports set up and going.
Thank Gerald Hoffman, Canadian building designer, for sharing this project with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, really cool project. And so within this, you can see here I've broken up all these different reports. I generally like doing this by CSI master format here in the US, which is a really nice, clean way of organizing cost codes and allows us to really correlate between specifications and the trades of construction. So one that might be just kind of really easy to take a look at here might be something like windows, for example. So we can arrange this a few different ways. We can move around our different fields so that we can organize it by either subset or by story or by layer or by size or by object type. We have all these different ways of organizing this. But just to take this real quickly out to Excel, say if we wanted to start going through and adding up some costs and doing some calculations, we can simply just save as, and we just need to change our file format to an XLSX, and I'm just going to publish to my desktop for the moment, and we can just open this up. So as soon as I export this out, just as we're viewing it here in our schedule, we can bring this out to Excel. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and we can start, working with it and calculating things here. So, if we wanted, we could add some formulas to the right here. Maybe we wanted to just say, cost calc, and essentially we can replicate some of the same things Eric was talking about minutes ago with the formula, or with the expression-based formulas. So say in this case, we're pricing it by our unit cost is based off square feet. So what would we want to do? Well, we'd want to take our opening, which is 8 square feet in this case, and we want to multiply it by our unit cost. And now all of a sudden we can start adding up some costs here. And I'm going to take this column, make this a little larger so we can see it. And I can just double click on this. Sometimes it lets me, sometimes it doesn't. So I can take this, pull it down, and there we go. We're starting to work up some cost calcs here, you know, very basic. The one downside to this type of workflow though is, say we make some changes in the model and we want to update this, we don't really have a good way of refreshing it in this type of format. Something else we can do is we can link this type of information into a blank workbook. So I can take that same, I'm just going to pick a random cell here. I can go to my data. I can insert it from a, well, let's see, new query from file, from workbook. There's a few different formats we can do, but we can essentially make an external connection to that same report. So I'll go to my desktop, I'll grab that Windows file, we can import it, and it's going to run through and try to create a connection. So let's just load it. So there's a few different ways of doing this. So I imported it here as essentially as a XLSX into another XLSX format, which actually is a little bit more difficult to work with sometimes. It appears that this actually cut off some of the data right here, which is interesting. But another way to do this is actually, and what I find is a very neutral format for this, is instead of actually exporting out to a XLSX file, we can actually take this out in a TXT file, which is a little bit more neutral, and it tends to work a little better on Macs actually. So if we export this out to a TXT, I'll save that. We'll just do a new book again. And so this is, if I'm doing this method, I'll tend to usually go with the TXT because there's a little better import wizard here. And so in this case, we can just import, and we'll just go straight to finish, and we'll just hit OK. And okay, so there's our data. And what's nice about this now is because we've created this external data connection, we can then overwrite that file and refresh this into an Excel workbook here. So it allows us to add some formulas off to the right here. We could say, you know, cost calculation. We could create a report over here. And this is something that we can continue to work on in ArchiCAD, and we can just republish or resave this file on top of that same file. And then all we have to do is just refresh our connection. So we just refresh our sheet. Actually, I think I want to turn off that. There's a setting in there I probably wanted to turn off. I was trying to do it a little quick. So we don't want to prompt for file name on refresh. I would uncheck that. So that way I can just, you know, if I decided to delete some of this, I can just refresh and it's going to repopulate with whatever information is in that latest version. So this is kind of another method of exporting to a format and bringing that into Excel. The third method that I want to talk about, I'm going to close these down. Don't save. And we'll open this up. This is another workbook. So this is actually the C5D estimate template that we've linked up with this example project here. And so another way of doing this is actually just going through the publisher. And by the way, we can do the TXT through this format as well, just by setting it up in our publisher. So we can set up all these reports and have them publish out through the publisher, which can make this really nice. But another way of doing this is to actually use a macro, which will allow us to essentially set our file path from ArchiCAD. And then it's a little bit more of a robust and largely built out Excel estimate template. But what this allows us to do is just, instead of doing individual TXT files or individual XLSX files at once, in this case, we can just point to an entire folder at once and then just list all the sources within the folder. So in this case, I could refresh, what do I have? 56 different reports all at once here. Let's kind of stick with the Windows as an example. We can go to the Windows sheet here. I I can clear the data and I can just refresh onto this sheet. Well, that wasn't supposed to happen, but let me double check this. Data sources, browse. Oh, let's see, Arc5D, condominium project, estimate, cost reports. Okay, check for updates. That's the only one. Let's just go back here. We'll republish this report. And let's hope that this is going to work in this case. So it was working a second ago. So let's refresh. Object variable. Well, doesn't look like that is going to work.
I think ultimately, let's just take it up one level here. Obviously, when you're working quickly to try to just have something ready for a quick demonstration, you're likely to break certain things. So I'm not too surprised or upset about it. But what do we have here? Any ArchiCAD user can run reports in schedules. You can get a door schedule, a window schedule, an appliance schedule. You can use inside ArchiCAD some formulas that were introduced into version 22 that allow you to do some calculations like you saw for my little zone thing. You can have it even sophisticated enough to say, well, this is based on the vertical height of a column versus the length of a beam, etc. So you can do some quantity takeoffs directly inside ArchiCAD. But if you want to do real estimating, if you want to do some more sophisticated combinations of things, then you'll want to take it out to Excel and use a variety of different approaches to pull the data from building materials or from individual elements as a whole. So what John's worked out is a workflow that just gives fantastically detailed estimates using, remember those legends that we talked about early on? You can eyedrop wall types, windows, objects, and have them already set up as you drop them into a project in the right schedules with at least some initial costing set up. And then you can actually refine the legends so you have your costing in your local area and keep that up to date. It's going to allow you to very quickly manage and update your quantity costing. So for more information, John and I have created a whole website called ArchiCADestimating.com. And if you want more information on the Arc5D solution, you can go to ArchiCADestimating.com, and there are some things that you can download for free. Just put in your name and we'll send them to you.
Yeah, Eric, I think I figured this out real quick. It had to do that I was working on this same file and I actually had that file open. So as it was refreshing here, it was finding two of those same files. And so you can see now that it did refresh and I was able to kind of change its formatting around. And so that was kind of an anomaly that I don't think I've ever run into before, where I had the same file open that I was trying to refresh on a sheet. And so it threw me off a little bit there, but you can see as we kind of back out here, that this can roll into an estimate template where we essentially have all these different line items coming into a summary so that we can then summarize it and at the bottom ultimately mark it up and come together with some cost totals. So just want to point out that wasn't entirely broken there. Got it to work. It's just a weird anomaly.
Yeah, it happens when you're trying to demonstrate quickly and you've got a bunch of things open. All right, so John, anything else? Just give you 1 or 2 more minutes. Is there anything else that visually is pretty interesting about how this solution works?
Yeah, well, what's nice is that it's all set up. So we have 2 really amazing example projects that we can share as part of this AMT plus C5D combo template. One is this one that we're looking at right now. Another is a residential project that's really a nice project as well, kind of put together from a different perspective, but both of them are really good learning tools for understanding it. Just to kind of talk about how this works in practice with the combined template is we've loaded up the legends file. So everything that we see here is all set up and ready to go for pricing. So all the different assemblies and the legends are set up. And essentially that makes it so that when you're working in the template, you just eyedropper and go, and then all these reports automatically get populated, and then you just have to refresh that into Excel. So just finished up the 23 USA version, a little bit, probably within the last hour. So that's ready to go. International version is ready to go. So yeah, this next round is ready. And for this next round, there's going to be a lot more short tutorial videos to kind of help all the users walk through this process, because estimating is one of those things that it's not super simple. But once you kind of get a little bit more acclimated with how it all functions, then you can really build some confidence. And that's the whole purpose here, is to help people build confidence and be able to use their models in just to the next level of detail. And estimating is a good kind of introduction into being able to get a lot more information out of your models. So I'm pretty excited about this next round.
Yeah. So it's been really an intense process working with John to get the training, the template, all of the system going. John's got a workflow that's been great for his personal use and for clients, but we work together to create something more general purpose that anyone can get and just sort of drop into your office and just customize your own costing and certain other choices and make it your own. So let me just take back the presenter role here. Let's see.
I'm going to stop showing my screen.
And so we're showing my screen here, and we'll just go back to the overview here as a closing thing. So we went through these 10 cool ArchiCAD tricks. All of the examples that you were seeing today were from Master Template 23, which is now available, actemplate.com. It's on sale for introductory discount price as well as discount on upgrades. If you want some of the resources for creating the visual appearances, where we're overriding things, making them sketchy, making just all the different graphic overrides and model view options that I described, you can go to archicadtutorials.com and opt in for the ArchiCAD resource pack. Right now I've got the 22 version, which probably works pretty well in 23, but I'm going to make sure that we have all the latest stuff in 23 format, and I'll get that done in the next few days. So I'm looking for any last comments or questions. Okay. So a bunch of thanks from different people, David and Steve and Rich Matthews, okay, and Saxon. And Ahmed has a question about, does ArchiCAD import point clouds from a 3D scanner? Yes, there is an option to do that. So you can bring it in, and then you can sort of see the shapes and forms, and of course, model your building in that context or show surroundings with that. Okay, and Gerald, who, thank you, glad you were on. Gerald saw his own project up there. Said he's always learning something, which is great. So thank you all for joining me. Why did I lose my closing slide here? Where is it? There it is. Okay, so if you want help with ArchiCAD, then please opt in for my list. If you're interested in getting coaching for ArchiCAD to be able to be more effective with your projects, you can sign up at archicadtraining.com/coaching. Or if you would like a comprehensive training program on ArchiCAD, you can go to archicadtraining.com/2020, or just go to the front page of that site and you'll see the 2020 course, which is currently, I'm reworking all of my training into version 22, 23 to be all up to date. So it's my pleasure to share my knowledge and my passion with you, who I know, if you're on the call, if you're on the session, you're watching all the way through to the end, and you are passionate about using ArchiCAD and getting the most from it. And it's my pleasure to help you and everyone else in the community around the world. So we'll be back with more soon. and look forward to continuing to learn myself as I work with experts like John, and all of you put me through paces, in terms of questions. It's always interesting when I get questions like, let me try to figure that one out. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching. Oh, okay. So John says, where can you get the sample projects that I mentioned? If you have master template, you can get the sample project, that little building that I have, that's just included. If you get the combined AMT plus C5D master template, which John created, built his Contrabim 5D on top of master template, then we have gotten permission from Gerald and Caitlin Kelly to share their projects for people who purchase the AMT plus C5D master template. And you can get information on that at archicadestimating.com or simply drop me a line at support@bobrow.com. Okay, so thank you all, and wishing you all happy Thanksgiving as well, coming up in a week here. Bye, everybody. But thanks, John.